How's it been going? Have you been to Toronto before? Right here?
I want to welcome everybody to the 2014 presidential address. I'd like to welcome you all to the event and thank you for coming. And it's my pleasant duty, and I'm very pleased to introduce the newly invested president of ISA, Amitav Acharya. He's professor of international relations and UNESCO chair in transnational challenges and governance, School of International Service at American University. And I'm especially honored to introduce him as ISA's first president from the Global South. Amitav is many of you know. Amitav, as many of you know, was born in India, where he received his BA and MA degrees. His PhD was in international politics from Murdoch University in Perth, Australia. Also, in an era of growing globalization, he's perhaps ISA's most cosmopolitan president. His previous academic positions before American University were in institutions in the United Kingdom, Singapore, Canada, and the United States. And with around 30 visiting positions all around the world, he's had positions in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and North America. That covers the one. He has served in a variety of administrative positions in many organizations, but importantly for this group, he has served as ISA Vice President in 2008-2009. In 2003 and 2004, he was the founding president of the Asian Political and International Studies Association. With areas of specialization in global governance, comparative regionalism, Asian security, Southeast Asia, and IR theory, he is one of the top specialists in the world on the international relations of Southeast Asia and ASEAN. A prolific scholar, he also has a worldwide presence through various media. For example, the BBC, World Service, CNN, Al Jazeera, and I can't leave out the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation Radio. Has an extensive list of media interviews and has written over 20 op-ed pieces for newspapers and other media outlets around the world. Of his many talks and keynote addresses, perhaps he is proudest of his April 14, 2011 address at the invitation of its president to the United Nations General Assembly in New York on the subject of human security. So let me just say, new ISA president, Amitav Acharya.
Thank you, Harishar. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It is actually a great pleasure for me to be back in the city of Toronto, where I lived and worked for most of the 1990s, teaching at York University. When I first arrived here, I was struck by the city's diversity, dynamism, and cosmopolitanism. Trust me, I'm not running for the mayor of the city. Although I hear that position can go with a replacement. But I do want to underscore that my years in this great city was my first encounter with the global society that we live in. But does our discipline, international relations or international studies, and I'm going to use them interchangeably, does our discipline truly reflect that global society? To be sure, IR, once described by Stanley Huffman as an American social science, is no longer so, at least in the physical or geographic sense. Over the past decades, IR schools, departments, institutes, conventions have mushroomed around the globe. But our discipline still needs to overcome a central challenge. Let me elaborate by going back a little bit in history. In the year 1800 AD, the Marquis of Wellesley, the Governor General of British India, set up a college at Fort William in what is today known as Kolkata, the hub of the new British Empire at that time. His objective was to give young officials of the British East India Company, I quote, better instructions in such branches of literature, science, and knowledge that is requisite for government and the stability of the British Empire, and for the maintenance of the interest and honor of the Honorable East India Company. Among the subjects to be taught in this college were native Indian languages and the rules and regulations of the company. The college was also to provide education in the true and sound principles of the British Constitution and other curricula similar to that used for educating persons destined for high office in the youth. Wellesley wanted to make the Fort William College the Oxford of the East, and its faculty the interpreters of Oriental civilization. In reality, however, the faculty of the college fell into two separate categories: the Sahibs and the Munshis, the British Sahibs and the native Munshis. The Munshis, which is a Persian term for native teachers, were needed principally to teach local languages, customs, and the history and antiquities of India. As the history of the college by Bernard Cohn notes, I quote, there was respect and some amicability in the relations between the two categories of persons. But it was the British who set the agenda and who had the authoritative voice in determining what was useful knowledge. Unquote. The role assigned to the Munsis and their Hindu counterparts were called the Pandits at Fort William College was not only to be teachers but also as informants. According to another account of that college, I quote, the Indian scholar knew he was superior to his European master in respect of Indian languages, but he was primarily an informant, a mere tool in the exercise of language teaching, unquote. The College of Fort William did not survive very long. In 1805, the directors of the British East India Company decided to set up another college, not in India, but in Hailbury in England. The Fort William College survived for another 40 years or so, but was finally closed down in 1854. To many people outside the West, the history of IR would seem like a replay of the world of the Sahibs and the Munshis at Fort William. To be sure, in teaching and research, there has been a great deal of interaction between Western and non-Western scholars and institutions. But it is the university's scholars, publishing outlets in the West that have dominated and set the agenda for IR scholarship, and IR scholarship has regarded the non-Western world as a place for carriers rather than thinkers, and used it for field work and theory testing rather than to look for indigenous ideas and approaches. I do not imply that this particular underdevelopment of IR is entirely the product of Western intellectual neocolonialism. Much responsibility also lies in the economic and political conditions in the developing world. Conditions such as scarce resources, political interference, lack of freedom of expression have also stunted the development of IR as a global discipline. But we in the IR community also bear some responsibility for this state of affairs. Peter Kattenstein has observed, I quote, the main event of the 20th century may well have been decolonization rather than World War I and II, despite the unspeakable horrors they brought the world over, unquote. Yet how much of IR text and theory is woven around the realities of colonization and decolonization, as opposed to the workings of the European international order, the ascent of the United States, and the Cold War. IR as a discipline has neither fully accounted for nor come to terms with colonialism and its legacy. We, and I include myself, in the IR community are complicit in the marginalization of the post-colonial world in developing the discipline. Let me pose a few questions. Why do we view the Cold War as a long peace? Because the hundreds of conflicts and millions of people who lost their lives in conflicts around the world did so outside the West, mostly in the developing world, the so-called Third World. Another question. Why do we ignore colonial wars or the so-called extra-systemic conflicts in assessing the evidence for democratic peace theory, when there is compelling evidence that these extra-systemic wars have been fought mainly by democracies? Third point, when considering the ideas that are state international relations, why do we make so much of Thucydides, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, and Kant, but not of Ashoka, Kautilya, Sanchiv, Ibn Khaldun, Jawaharlal Nehru, Raoul Krugich, and Franz Fanon, or so many others in the developing world? Examples of this sort of escapism in IR are many and increasingly well known. As I said earlier, IR as a subject of study is expanding and generating a lot of excitement around the world. Let me give you some examples from the regions that I am personally familiar with. This is a conference recently at Jawaharlal Nehru University with 300 papers, 70 panels. This was not a meeting to set up an Indian school of IR, but to discuss issues and themes of IR around the globe, covering all regions and all topics in a way that will mirror an ISA convention, albeit in a microcosm. This is a picture of Yangon University. After 15 years, the government allowed the teaching of IR at undergraduate level, and the courses were oversubscribed. These are IR students from the Muhammadiyah University in Indonesia. You can see the excitement in their face, and you can see that this is a slight visit to the Jakarta Post newspaper. The excitement of studying international relations is visible from their faces. So IR is on the move around the world, and I'm sure you'll find such examples from all parts of the world. But despite its growing popularity, the dominant narratives, theories, and methods of IR fail to correspond to the increasingly global distribution of its subjects. Distinctions between West and the rest may be blurry in material terms, but these are yet to fully register in the way IR is studied, published, discoursed, and located in terms of centers of learning. How do we address this gap? In a project undertaken nearly a decade ago, a group of scholars led by Barry Guzan and myself asked the question, why is there no non-Western IR theory? The project explored the reasons for this underdevelopment of IR theory outside the West, including cultural, political, and institutional factors viewed against the hegemonic status of established theories. The project also identified some of the possible sources of non-Western IR theory, including but not limited to indigenous history and culture, the ideas of nationalist leaders, distinctive local and regional interaction patterns, and the writings of scholars of distinction working in various parts of the developing world. Subsequent debates on the state of the IR in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and other parts of the world have taken up and further developed these critiques and suggestions. But the labeling of non-Western IR theory also sparked controversy. Some would project post-Western, with a more radical agenda to disavow and displace the existing Western IR. I regard non-Western, post-Western as part of a broader challenge of reimagining IR as a global discipline. And I call this project Global IR. The Global IR project transcends the distinction between the West and the non-West. While these categories might persist as terms of convenience, they cannot have analytical significance in a world of global IR. It is also obvious that in using the term global IR, I am not calling for renaming our discipline completely. So much for so long has been written of and about international relations that it can perhaps now claim to be a heritage site, which in my view is worth preserving. But global IR is not the same as traditional IR as we know of it. Broadly stated, the idea of global IR revolves around 6 main dimensions. It is founded upon a pluralistic universalism, not applying to all, but recognizing and respecting the diversity in us. It is grounded in world history, not just Greco-Roman, European, or US history. It subsumes rather than supplants existing IR theories and methods. It integrates the study of regions, regionalisms, and area studies. It eschews exceptionalism. It recognizes multiple forms of agency beyond material power, including resistance, normative action, and local constructions of global order. Let me briefly elaborate on some of these categories. First and foremost, global IR calls for a new understanding of universalism or universality. The dominant meaning of universalism in IR today is what I would call a monistic universalism in the sense of applying to all. It corresponds closely to Enlightenment universalism. As Robert Cox once put it, in the Enlightenment meaning, universal meant true for all time and space, the perspective of a homogeneous reality. And this universalism also had a dark side, the suppression of diversity and justification for imperialism. In IR theory and method, such universalism has been pursued as a way of much arbitrary standard setting, gatekeeping, and marginalizing alternative narratives, ideas, and methodologies. Cox offers an alternative conception of universalism which rests on comprehending and respecting diversity in an ever-changing world. This universalism rejects